You're listening to the Para is My Normal podcast. We are a bit science, a bit woo, and all curious about that which defies explanation because sometimes it normal just isn't.
Welcome to Eloise Reconsidered. This episode is part one of a two-part series on one of the most storied institutions in American medical history, Eloise Hospital. But we're not starting with ghost stories. Not yet. Because before Eloise became a haunted attraction, before the whispers and shadow figures, it was something else entirely different. A remarkable, self-sustaining city of care. A place of innovation, heartbreak, and resilience. A place that shaped the way we think about medicine, mental health, and even community. So in this first chapter, we'll explore how Eloise came to be. The land, the people, the breakthroughs, the contradictions, and the beauty that still lingers in its bones. Next time, we'll dive into the hauntings, the legends, the echoes, and some of our evidence. But today, we're going to honor the foundation. Eloise isn't just a haunted hospital, it's a living archive of emotion, a place where science met suffering, where memory refuses to fade, and where the veil between past and present feels just a little thinner. So whether you believe in ghosts or not, Eloise invites you to listen. I invite you to listen. Welcome to Para is My Normal. Eloise Reconsidered. Imagine it's the year 1839. You're in Detroit, Michigan, a city still finding its shape, its soul. The streets are muddy, the buildings sparse. The population hovers around 3,000, and the Erie Canal has just begun funneling settlers westward. But beyond the city's edge lies something else, something darker. You've fallen on hard times. Maybe you're even sick. Maybe you're poor. Maybe you're simply unwanted. And the county has decided you're to be sent to the poorhouse. This isn't a short trip. The new facility is nearly 2 days away by stagecoach, down the old Chicago Road, what we now call Michigan Avenue. The destination? A remote stretch of land in Nanking Township, surrounded by dense woods, wild animals, and whispers in the night. Many refuse to go. 111 people, in fact, decline the transfer from Detroit's original poorhouse at Gratiot and Mount Elliott. They call this new site an awful wilderness. And they're not wrong. The land had once belonged to the Torbert family, who ran a modest farm and a log cabin saloon known as the Black Horse Tavern, which was a stagecoach stop between Detroit and Chicago. It was a place of rest, but also of some rowdy encounters. In 1839, Wayne County purchased the 160-acre property for $800. That included the tavern, 4 cows, a yoke of oxen, and a handful of tools. The tavern became the keeper's quarters. The barn housed pigs, and the mentally ill were upstairs above the squealing livestock. Now, some say the land itself was never meant to be peaceful, that the soil remembers, that violence, the isolation, the desperation soaked into the earth. And that's why, even now, Eloise doesn't rest. Could the hauntings be more than residual energy? Could they be the land itself pushing back? The name Eloise wasn't chosen at random. Back in 1894, the U.S. Post Office required a short, unique name for the new postal station on the grounds. And Detroit's postmaster at the time, Freeman Dickerson, suggested the name of his 4-year-old daughter, Eloise Dickerson Davik. She lived to be 93 years old, and the hospital bore her name long after her death. By the early 1900s, Eloise was no longer a poorhouse. It had become a sprawling medical complex, one of the largest in the country. Over 900 acres, 70 buildings, thousands of patients. And it was divided into 3 main branches. There was a general hospital, a tuberculosis sanitarium, and a psychiatric hospital. Each had its own rules, had its own fears, and each had its own forgotten stories. The psychiatric wing housed patients with schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, depression, but also with epilepsy, grief, and just stricken by poverty. Diagnosis was often arbitrary, treatment experimental, and consent was rarely a part of the equation. The tuberculosis sanatorium was a place of isolation. Patients lay in bed-lined halls, coughing blood. Some were fortunate to pass with family nearby, while others just died alone, and all were buried quickly to prevent the spread. Workers wore cloth masks and desperation like a second skin. Outside, the cemetery grew. Thousands buried in numbered markers instead of names. One for each forgotten life, one for each echo. So let's talk about that cemetery. Not the kind with headstones and flowers, not even the kind with names etched in granite. Eloise had a potter's field, a burial ground for the poor, the unclaimed, the forgotten. From 1910 to 1948, more than 7,000 patients were buried here. No names, just numbered bricks. A field of anonymous souls. Now, the cemetery sits just south of Michigan Avenue today, near Henry Ruff Road. Today, it looks like an empty field, but beneath the grass lie thousands of bodies, stacked close, sometimes even overlapping. The markers are small cement blocks stamped with numbers. That's it. No epitaphs, no stories. And many of those buried here died alone. Some were victims of tuberculosis, others psychiatric patients whose families never came back. Some were immigrants, some were children, some were never identified at all. And here's the part few people know. After 1948, burial stopped. Instead, unclaimed bodies were sent to the Detroit College of Medicine, now known as Wayne State University School of Medicine. They were used for anatomical study, medical research, cadaver training. And it was legal. It was practical, but also could be very deeply unsettling. These weren't just bodies. They were people. People who had lived, suffered, and died within Eloise's walls. And now they were being dissected in classrooms without ceremony, often without consent. Now, some death registers survive, listing occupations like teamster, baker, domestic. Causes of death include exhaustion from paralysis, senility, strangulation from hanging, but many entries are vague. Some are missing entirely, and in 1934, only 4 death records remain. Genealogists and volunteers have tried to match numbers to names. Some were successful, but most remain unknown. John and Jane Doe's, buried in silence. Now, a few did try to restore some dignity, and in the 1930s, burials were handed by Charles Diggs Sr., founder of Michigan's largest funeral home. His teenage son, Charles Jr., would drive his mother to Eloise's morgue, the roundhouse, to prepare bodies. If no clothing was available, they'd wrap the deceased in white sheets. If no family came, inmates performed the burial. Today, the cemetery is fenced off. No trespassing signs line the perimeter. Volunteers have uncovered hundreds of markers, cleaning them, documenting them, honoring them, because these people matter. We talk about hauntings, about those echoes, but maybe the real haunting is this, that so many were buried without names, that their final contribution was to science, not to the memory of others. And maybe, just maybe, the land remembers. Eloise was a city unto itself. It had its own fire department, bakery, greenhouse, but beneath the surface, it was a place of containment, a place where society sent those it didn't want to see. So now we enter the darkest corridors. Eloise pioneered treatments that today would raise horror, yet back then they were hailed as breakthroughs. And let's walk through them for a moment. There was insulin shock therapy. Patients were injected with massive doses of insulin, plunging them into hypoglycemic comas. The idea here was a forced reset of the brain. Now, some emerged confused, others never quite emerged back, and a few never even woke up at all. There was also hydrotherapy. Now, this is not your spa indulgence. Patients were wrapped in freezing wet towels or submerged for hours in cold baths. Others endured scalding water meant to purge bad thoughts. Skin blistered. Spirits broke. There was also electroconvulsive therapy, ECT. Often without anesthesia, electrodes were placed on temples. A jolt of electricity surged through the body. Convulsions, screams, and a silence afterwards, some referred to as healing, others called it hell. Now, in later days, when I was working at Eloise, we were told stories about how former patients would come through the tours, and one of them had actually relayed that you knew when you were going to get ECT treatment because you weren't getting your breakfast that morning. So there was testimonies, some smuggled out or just whispered to family. They painted a picture of fear, despair, even control disguised as compassion. Was this science? Or was this a spectacle? Or was it some combination of both? Some patients, 31 in exact, were subject to lobotomies. Others were sterilized, and many more simply forgotten, left to wander the halls until death claimed them. Eloise was a place of contradictions, healing and harm, progress and pain, and those contradictions still echo. Now, before we step into the shadows, let's pause in the light. Because Eloise wasn't just a place of pain, it was also a true place of progress. A place where medicine evolved, where care, however imperfect, was deeply rooted in the belief that healing was possible. So let's talk about the good. Eloise was one of the first hospitals in the United States to use X-rays for diagnostic purposes. In 1915, patients stood in stereoscopic rooms as physicians peered inside the body without a single incision. It was revolutionary, and it made Eloise a destination, not just for psychiatric care, but for general medicine across Michigan. And actually, Eloise was the first kidney dialysis unit in Michigan. Yeah, Eloise housed Michigan's first kidney dialysis unit at a time when renal failure was a death sentence. Eloise offered hope. The unit saved lives and laid groundwork for future nephrology programs across the state and the country. Long before it was mainstream, Eloise embraced music therapy. Patients joined choirs, they sang in groups, they played instruments, and they healed not just physically, but emotionally. Music became medicine, and for many, it was the first time they felt truly heard. Eloise's tuberculosis sanitarium didn't just isolate patients, it innovated. Patients were treated with open air therapy, a practice that emphasized fresh air, sunlight, and even movement. It was part of a broader shift towards holistic care, and it helped reduce mortality rates during the height of the tuberculosis epidemic. Patients weren't just confined, they were engaged on the premises. Eloise believed in purposeful activity, so residents worked in greenhouses, dairies, and even the bakery. They made sauerkraut from cabbages grown on Eloise's own farm. They painted, they read, they celebrated holidays, and these weren't just distractions. These were their lifelines. Now, one of the most interesting things I personally found coming out of Eloise was the concept of television therapy. Yes, even television was used therapeutically. Patients watched curated programs designed to stimulate memory and reduce anxiety and foster connection. It was a precursor to today's digital therapies and a reminder that innovation often begins with empathy. There was also radium for cancer treatment. Eloise physicians experimented with radium therapy, a cutting edge approach at the time. And while the science was still evolving, the intent was clear to offer hope where none had existed before. Eloise had a philosophy. The healing required community, that patients deserved dignity, and that medicine was more than pills and procedures. It was connection. So while it's easy for us to focus on hauntings, the horror, the harm, Eloise was also a place of firsts, of breakthroughs, of compassion, however flawed. And maybe that's the real ghost story here, that even in the darkest places, light finds a way in. So today, Eloise stands mostly abandoned. Its buildings cracked open by time, but according to many, something lingers. EVP recordings have captured unexplained voices. We've even captured one that said, "Get out of here." You want us to know? Urban legends whisper of shadow figures crossing the hallways and doors slamming without wind. I've even seen cat balls be picked up and thrown off of a chair right in front of me, hurled at the very group I was leading through on the tour. One theory that surrounds Eloise is that stone tape theory. That emotion, particularly trauma, can imprint itself on its surroundings. And Eloise had trauma in abundance. It had a lot of emotions. So could the walls themselves be echoing back that fear, that grief, even the loss? Some believe Eloise doesn't just house ghosts, that in and of itself, Eloise is a ghost, a living echo of everything it once contained. Others point to ley lines, that spiritual energy grids that crisscross the globe. Could Eloise sit on one? Could the land itself be amplifying the pain? And there's always the question of intention. If a place was built to contain suffering, does it ever truly let go? So before we say goodbye to Eloise, let's linger here just a little longer. Because this place wasn't just haunted, it was layered, complex, full of strange details and forgotten brilliance. And so there's some interesting things that I think we don't really talk about a lot when we speak of Eloise. Typically in the paranormal community, we talk about all the atrocities and all the ghosts. There's a lot that has happened at this location, but I really want to also give you insights on the totality of what Eloise was before we really get into what Eloise currently is. Eloise was so vast, again, spanning over 900 acres, that it had its own railroad spur and trolley line. So supplies, patients, and staff moved across the grounds like a miniature city. Imagine riding a trolley past a greenhouse, dairy barns, and psychiatric wards, all within one institution. Not all the patients or inmates, as they were called, were there on, say, bad terms. And in fact, a very famous person was a patient. The famous black inventor, Elijah McCoy, whose name inspired the phrase, the real McCoy, spent his final year at Eloise. Now, he was not a psychiatric patient. He died in 1929, and his presence adds a poignant layer to the hospital's legacy. A reminder that even brilliance sometimes ends in obscurity. Several Major League Baseball players actually passed to Eloise, including Jewel Custis, Larry Lejeune, and Marty Cavanaugh. Musician Horace Flinders also received music therapy there. So of the original 78 buildings, only not even a handful still stand. The firehouse, the power plant, and the infamous D building, once used for psychiatric admissions. The D building, or the Cape Beard building, is the building that you actually investigate. Now, in current management, they're actually opening up here in 2025 the power plant and the firehouse for you to go to. They've also opened up, I think, the attic and the basement and sub-basement in the Cape Beard building to investigate. But a lot of the complex has just been absorbed back into the neighborhood. And today, Eloise is part haunted attraction, part historical site. Some call it disrespectful. Others say it's keeping the history alive. But the question remains, are we actually listening to what Eloise has to say? Or are we just collecting those ghost stories like souvenirs? And at the end of the day, does it end up just being one big money grab? I don't know. Eloise was never just one thing. It was a poorhouse, a hospital, a city, a sanctuary, a prison. It was home. It was a place where science met suffering, where joy flickered in the shadows, and where stories, both tragic and triumphant, refused to be forgotten. My friends, you know that Eloise was the beginning of Para Is My Normal. We recently went back here in July and did a private. So Michael, myself, and our friend Megan. And we had a very interesting evening. And it was the first time that we were fully, completely alone in the building. Just the three of us with Jade, who was the building representative that night. We had an amazing time saying goodbye to Eloise. I don't really know that we're going to be going back, which is a shame considering we have visited her over 100 times. We've worked there, and I literally mean it when I say it was home. We met a second family at Eloise. We met some of the dearest friends we've ever had because of Eloise. And while times are different now, wish them luck, and we will forever be fans of her because Eloise is such a beauty. And I'm just going to leave it at that. So in part 2 of our Eloise series, we'll explore the haunted history, the legends, the voices, the sightings, and yes, our own investigations. You'll hear from former Eloise employees, paranormal researchers, and those who felt something they couldn't explain. Because some places don't just hold history, they hold us. If you've had an experience at Eloise, or if your family has a connection to its past, I'd love to hear from you. Reach out at paraismynormal.com or feel free to message us at paraismynormal@gmail.com. So with that, my friends, just like to remind you, investigate, illuminate, validate, and don't fear the truth. Follow it.